There is a kind of feminine presence that does not advertise itself, not through performance, but through an invisible shift, like pressure changing before a storm. People feel it without understanding what they're feeling. Some become drawn in, some become irritated, some become strangely quiet, as if a part of them has been recognized against their will. Culture calls it mysterious. Social media calls it high vibe. But Jung would call it something more precise: psychic integration. This is not about being better. It is not about being more spiritual. It is about being more real than the collective trance can comfortably hold. And that is why it becomes rare, because reality has a cost. Reality demands that the shadow be faced. Reality demands that a woman stop negotiating with her own truth. 3 signs tend to appear only after that inner crossing. They are not cute personality traits, they are structural changes in the psyche, markers that a woman has walked through the underworld of herself and returned with a kind of stillness the world cannot control. Carl Jung spoke about psychic energy as a living force, libido, and he didn't mean it in the narrow way modern culture does, not just sexuality, not just attraction. Libido is the inner current that drives you to create, to connect, to risk truth, to move toward meaning. It's the fuel behind love, courage, imagination, and the will to become. When that energy gets fractured, spent on pleasing, proving, performing, something inside starts to buzz, not excitement, noise, the kind that makes you overthink texts, over-explain yourself, and silently bargain for acceptance. The psyche becomes a stage, and you become both the actor and the exhausted audience. But when that energy is gathered, when shadow and light are no longer enemies, something steadier takes shape. Not perfection, coherence. A nervous system that doesn't live in constant threat. An identity that doesn't require applause to feel real. A self that stops outsourcing its power through projection, placing its worth, safety, or destiny onto someone else. A woman who no longer negotiates her value with the room. That's what people think they're sensing when they say high vibration. And that's why her presence can feel disruptive. Truth doesn't have to announce itself to expose what's false. Clear water doesn't insult the dirt at the bottom. It reveals it simply by staying clear. So the 3 signs in this video aren't a ladder to climb or a personality to perform. They're recognitions, evidence that individuation is already underway, your psyche quietly becoming more whole. Before we name the signs, one ritual question to sharpen everything that follows. In the comments, write one word people call you when you refuse to perform. Cold, intimidating, distant, too much, hard to read, no story, no explanation, just the word, because that word is rarely a diagnosis. Most of the time, it's what truth looks like to someone who still needs you to play a role. The first rare sign is not what the world rewards. It isn't popularity. It isn't being the loudest light in the room. It isn't the kind of confidence that needs an audience to keep it alive. The first sign is quieter than that, and that's why most people misread it. It is chosen solitude, and the difference between solitude and isolation decides everything. Isolation is what happens when the psyche retreats out of injury. Connection feels like a trap, so the nervous system builds a bunker. It's not peace. It's protection that hardens into distance. Solitude is different. Solitude is sovereignty. It's the moment a woman realizes she has been leasing her inner life to environments that demand self-abandonment as the entry price. The moment she understands that being included is not the same as being respected. This shift rarely starts with a dramatic speech. It starts like a subtle loss of appetite. The conversations that used to feel fun begin to feel thin, like chewing air. The jokes start to sound like small betrayals. The social rituals that once felt like belonging start to taste metallic. Rooms built on competition and smiling cruelty begin to feel like weather moving into the bones, nothing obvious. Yet the body knows, and she may not have a name for it at first. She only notices something honest. Her body is no longer willing to cooperate with what her soul has outgrown. This is where Jung gives the mechanism. Individuation requires separation from the collective unconscious, not exile, not hatred of people. Psychological distance from the mass trance that assigns women their safety scripts. Be beautiful in the approved way. Be nurturing even when you are empty. Be the connective tissue holding everyone else together. When a woman begins to individuate, she begins to feel the violence of those scripts, not always physical violence, psychic violence. The violence of being reduced to a function, the violence of living as a role instead of a self. This is why chosen solitude becomes a portal. It is the simplest rebellion. She stops offering herself as a resource to spaces that do not nourish her. The world rarely celebrates this. The world calls it arrogance, bitterness. She thinks she's too good. But what's actually happening is more human and more sacred. She is reclaiming her energy from unconscious contracts. Picture a group chat that once felt like friendship. At first it's memes, inside jokes, little check-ins. Then it becomes a daily ritual of subtle cruelty. Someone's relationship gets mocked. Someone's body becomes public property. Someone's success is treated like a threat, quickly softened with a laugh, as if cruelty can be cleaned by humor. She used to play along. She used to send the laughing emoji to prove she's easygoing. Then one day, her stomach turns. Not moral superiority, nausea. The body is saying, this is poison disguised as bonding. She doesn't make an announcement. She doesn't try to educate anyone into decency. She simply stops showing up. And in the silence that follows, something returns to her like blood returning to a limb that has been asleep. Self-respect. This is individuation in motion, the psyche separating from its costume. Chosen solitude is not antisocial, it's psychic hygiene. It's the psyche learning to protect its integrity the way the body protects itself from infection, without hatred, without drama, without negotiation with the thing that harms it. And the rare part is not being alone. Many people are alone. The rare part is solitude without bitterness, solitude that isn't punishment, but sanctuary. A quiet room where a woman can finally hear her own mind again. Because the deeper truth is this: in noise, the unconscious cannot speak clearly. In constant social performance, the psyche loses contact with its symbols. It forgets its own language. Solitude restores the signal. Dreams thicken. Intuition sharpens like a blade that had been left dull. Creativity returns like a river released from a dam. The woman begins to notice patterns, not as motivational quotes, but as lived evidence. What drains her, what nourishes her, where she performs, where she disappears, where she bargains. And this is why the sign is rare. It requires tolerating the withdrawal symptoms of leaving the collective, the strange emptiness after stepping out of familiar dynamics, the fear of being misunderstood, the discomfort of not being easy anymore. The collective tries to pull her back with labels: cold, selfish, strange, too intense. But a psyche that has tasted truth tends to become stubborn, not loud, not defensive, just unwilling to go back to sleep. The second sign is misunderstood so consistently that it can feel like a sentence. People mistake it for arrogance, punishment, superiority, anything really, except what it is, the silence that disturbs, not silence as emptiness, silence as containment. Silence as a woman no longer using language to soothe the room into comfort while she quietly bleeds inside. In a culture addicted to explanation, the refusal to over-explain gets translated as cruelty. In a culture trained to fill every gap with sound, a woman's quiet starts to look suspicious, like an unanswered question hanging in the air, demanding someone solve it. Jung would not call it cruelty. He would call it a disruption of projection. Projection is the psyche's oldest trick. What cannot be faced within is thrown outward, attached to other people like a label. The unintegrated mind uses human beings as screens. It turns its own fear into your coldness, its own envy into your arrogance, its own chaos into your attitude. This is not malicious all the time, it is automatic. It is the unconscious protecting itself from the pain of self-knowledge. A woman who has integrated more of her shadow becomes difficult to project onto, not because she fights, but because she stops cooperating with the usual social choreography. She doesn't scramble to make everyone comfortable. She doesn't rush to reassure people who are offended by her boundaries. She doesn't offer self-deprecation like a bribe to be allowed to exist. She simply remains with herself, and that, staying seated inside one's own being, is rare enough to feel threatening. Because when someone sits in themselves, the room loses its anesthesia. The noise doesn't vanish, it becomes audible. The little compulsions show up, the urge to fill silence, the need to be liked, the addiction to being on, the reflex to manage perception. Her quiet presence makes those reflexes visible the way bright light makes dust appear in the air. The dust was always there. The light didn't create it. The light only refused to hide it. A group setting. The conversation moves fast, laughter arrives a beat too loud, stories feel rehearsed, like everyone is auditioning for belonging. Then a familiar topic appears, the one that reliably triggers gossip. The group leans in, energy rises, someone waits for her contribution, expecting the usual ritual, a small judgment, a clever remark, the bonding through dissection that masquerades as intimacy. She doesn't join in, not with a sermon, not with a glare, just a quiet absence from the performance. The air changes, a chair shifts, someone cracks a joke to patch the discomfort. Another person tries to bait her, subtle provocation, a small hook tossed into the water to see if she'll bite. Because her silence has turned into a mirror, and the mirror is showing something nobody wants to see. The emptiness beneath the ritual. Emptiness is easy to tolerate when it stays unnamed. It becomes unbearable the moment it is recognized. This is why women like this get called intimidating. Not because they are trying to dominate, because they are no longer shrinking to make other people feel safe in their own unconsciousness. Jung wrote about the persona, the social mask that keeps the individual acceptable to the group. Most rooms are built on personas colliding politely. A woman who has loosened her attachment to persona does something the collective cannot predict. She stops shaping herself around other people's expectations. Her presence reveals the gap between what is said and what is meant. It exposes the hidden hunger beneath the jokes. It highlights the transactional warmth. People sense that she can see the difference, even when she says nothing about it. The reactions tend to split into three kinds. Some respond with respect because they feel truth and recognize it like a tuning fork. Some respond with attraction because an integrated presence can feel like clean water in a thirsty world. Some respond with hostility, especially in environments where the social hierarchy depends on performance. Hostility is common when a woman's silence breaks the unspoken contract of femininity. Many women are trained to become the emotional translator of the room, smoothing tension, offering reassurance, absorbing discomfort, making everyone feel okay. A woman who stops doing that can look like she has become hard when what has actually happened is that she has become honest. Her silence becomes a boundary, not a weapon, a line drawn in sand. Your feelings belong to you. Your reactions are yours to process. Your discomfort is not my assignment. This does not mean she is emotionally unavailable. It means she refuses false intimacy. False intimacy bonds through gossip, shared complaints, collective victimhood, subtle manipulation, closeness without truth. It can feel warm, but it leaves a residue. A high-integrated woman learns to recognize that residue and stops paying its price. She may still speak. She may still laugh. She may still be kind, but her warmth changes texture. It becomes selective, not performative. It carries a spine. And that spine is what people feel. A necessary warning belongs here because this is where many high-vibration narratives become dishonest. Silence does not automatically mean maturity. Silence can be avoidance. Silence can be passive aggression. Silence can be a polished mask worn by someone terrified of being seen. Silence can be a spiritual costume. So what makes this sign rare is not silence itself, but silence paired with presence. Presence means she is not punishing the room with quiet. She is simply no longer sacrificing herself to keep the room comfortable. Presence means she can remain still without disappearing. It means her nervous system is not frozen, it is regulated. Her silence is not a threat, it is a refusal to lie. This is why her presence becomes catalytic, not because she is trying to change people, but because she has stopped abandoning herself. And that brings the story to the third sign, the one that changes the entire structure of her relationships and often determines who stays and who falls away, the refusal to rescue or be rescued. The third sign is the most liberating and often the loneliest. It's the end of the rescue contract. Many women are trained into a hidden belief system so early it feels like personality. Love means saving. Love means anticipating what other people need before they name it. Love means holding the emotional weather for everyone in the house, then calling that exhaustion devotion. Jung would trace this to deeper archetypal currents, the mother complex, the wounded feminine, the hunger to be needed as proof of worth, because being needed can feel like safety. If they need you, they won't leave. If you keep them stable, you won't be abandoned. If you carry their pain, you'll earn a place in their life. A woman can be intelligent, self-aware, even spiritually fluent, and still be trapped in rescue as identity. Rescue gives her a role. Rescue gives her direction. Rescue gives her the illusion of control over loss. But the high-integrated woman exits that bargain, not because her compassion dries up, because discernment finally grows teeth. She learns the difference between support and possession, between care and control, between empathy and self-erasure. She stops mistaking emotional labor for intimacy. She stops confusing chaos with depth. She stops calling a wound a bond just because it keeps two people close. A vignette makes it visible. A partner spirals. Old trauma erupts. Their nervous system floods the room. And suddenly there's an unspoken demand. Fix this. Soothe this. Carry this. Absorb this. Make me okay so I don't have to meet myself. The old version of her would have turned into a private emergency room. She would have studied every tone change, every pause, every sigh. She would have sacrificed her own nervous system to stabilize theirs, then wondered why she felt drained, resentful, invisible. The integrated version does something different. She stays kind, she stays present, she doesn't punish, but she does not abandon herself to rescue them from themselves. She doesn't confuse someone's suffering with a job assignment. She can hold eye contact without dissolving. She can offer warmth without becoming a sponge. And if she speaks, the sentence is simple enough to feel like a door closing softly. I'm here. but your healing belongs to you. That line is not cold, it is clean. It breaks the most common contract binding people together in misery. If you love me, you will prevent my pain. Jung's individuation demands this kind of strength. Not the strength of domination, the strength of not collapsing. It requires the capacity to witness another person's discomfort without turning it into a crisis you must solve to earn love. It requires a woman to stop using relationships as anesthesia, stop using closeness to numb what she refuses to face alone. And the other half of the sign is just as important. She no longer waits to be rescued. She stops looking for a savior disguised as a lover. She stops begging someone to name her worth so she can believe it. She stops chasing teachers, mentors, and gurus as if authority lives outside her skin. She stops handing the keys of her inner life to anyone who speaks confidently. In Jungian terms, this often signals a deeper integration of anima and animus. The inner receptive and assertive principles no longer split across external figures. She no longer projects authority onto men, softness onto women, strength onto the outside world, and then wonders why she feels incomplete. She retrieves the missing parts and brings them home. And when those inner principles start speaking to each other instead of fighting, something profound happens. Support becomes possible without dependence. Love becomes possible without captivity. Help can be received without shrinking into helplessness. Care can be offered without becoming enslaved. She can be tender without becoming collapsible. She can be firm without turning into armor. This is what maturity looks like in the nervous system, flexibility without self-erasure. And the world finds it unsettling because rescue relationships keep people asleep. They reward helplessness and punish boundaries. They allow pain to continue without accountability because one person becomes the designated carrier of the shared dysfunction. The rescuer holds the chaos so the other person never has to meet it. When a woman exits rescue, it doesn't just change her relationships, it changes the entire economy of connection around her. People who benefited from her self-abandonment begin to feel it as loss. They interpret her boundaries as betrayal. They call her changed, the way addicts call sobriety cold. Some leave loudly. Accusations fly, selfish, uncaring, detached, heartless. Some drift away quietly because her presence demands something they are not ready to offer, personal responsibility. And occasionally, rare but real, some return later after their own work, when they can finally meet her as an equal rather than as a resource. Now the pattern interrupt, the uncomfortable truth most high-vibe scripts avoid. This third sign can become a mask. A woman can learn the language of boundaries and use it to avoid intimacy. She can call it sovereignty while secretly staying protected from being seen. She can weaponize independence as a shield against vulnerability. She can confuse numbness with power and call it peace. Jung warned about inflation, the ego identifying with an archetype. The wise woman archetype can become a costume. The unbothered queen can become a polished defense, specialness disguised as spiritual maturity. So the real test of this sign is not how well she refuses rescue. The real test is whether she can still love without losing herself. Because true integration doesn't make a woman unreachable, it makes her unmanipulable. It doesn't eliminate attachment, it eliminates bargaining. It doesn't destroy tenderness, it removes the transaction hiding inside tenderness. That is the difference between genuine individuation and sophisticated avoidance, and it leads straight into the shadow side, because anything powerful has a shadow, and real depth is not flattery. Real depth includes the danger. Any identity can become a cage, even a spiritual one. A woman can outgrow chaos, stop rescuing, stop performing, stop chasing approval, and then a quieter danger arrives. It doesn't look like arrogance at first. It looks like discernment. It sounds like standards. It feels like relief. But if she isn't careful, relief hardens into superiority. Clarity turns into a throne. And the psyche begins to whisper a seductive sentence. I'm not like them. This is the shadow of the integrated self. Jung warned about this repeatedly. Archetypes are not costumes to wear. They are forces to be related to. The moment the ego identifies with an archetype, the wise woman, the awakened one, the untouchable, inflation begins. The ego doesn't disappear. It simply becomes refined. It learns the language of depth and uses it to stay special. And that's how high vibration becomes a disguise, not for others, for the self. Because real integration doesn't delete jealousy, anger, grief, exhaustion, doubt. It stops exiling them. It stops pretending they shouldn't exist. It brings them back into the inner circle, where they can be listened to without being obeyed, where they can be metabolized into wisdom instead of leaking out as contempt. The truly integrated woman doesn't float above humanity. She descends into it without breaking apart. She can feel envy without letting it steer her. She can feel rage without needing to scorch the room. She can feel loneliness without turning it into a performance of superiority. That descent is what makes her real, and reality is the only frequency that can't be faked for long. When performance falls away, something simple remains. Not simplicity as shallowness, not the empty calm of someone who has stopped caring. This is a different simplicity, the kind that arrives when the psyche is no longer split into competing selves, when the inner courtroom goes quiet, when you stop living as an argument. A woman like this doesn't become less human, she becomes less scattered. Her attention returns to the ordinary with a kind of reverence that doesn't need an audience. Sunlight on her skin stops being background noise and becomes proof that she is here. Water becomes more than hydration. It becomes a small ritual of returning to her body. Breath becomes a reminder that she doesn't need to earn the right to exist. And then there's the moment nobody claps for, the private moment that changes the whole structure of her life. A message arrives that would have once pulled her into a spiral. A room tries to pressure her into agreeing, laughing, shrinking, smoothing over what shouldn't be smoothed over. The old reflex rises, perform, explain, prove, please. But she doesn't follow it. She chooses truth over approval, quietly, without drama. And that choice feels clean, like stepping out of a crowded, smoky place into cold night air. The collective rewards drama. It rewards reaction. It rewards the loudness of pain. The psyche rewards alignment. It rewards coherence. It rewards the slow dignity of staying faithful to the self. So over time, she measures her life differently, not by who texts back, not by who validates her, not by who is impressed, by the quality of her inner weather, by how often her mind feels like home instead of a battlefield, by the clarity of her boundaries, strong enough that she doesn't have to rehearse explanations in her head, by the peace that comes from not abandoning herself. That is the real signature, not glow, not aesthetics, not spiritual branding, integrity,